The sound of shattered glass echoed through the quiet suburban street as flames began to lick the sides of a modest, well-kept home. Neighbors peeked cautiously from their windows, some horrified, others too scared to intervene. By morning, the house would be a smoldering ruin, spray-painted slurs still visible through the ash and rubble. To most, it was just another cruel act of hate, another reminder of the prejudice still alive in the world. But for one woman, it wasn't just a home they destroyed. They had crossed the wrong person, and they didn't even know it yet. Her name was Maya Taylor, and to the people who thought they knew her, she was just a quiet, unassuming woman who moved into the neighborhood a few months ago. She kept to herself, walked her dog every evening, and occasionally waved politely at passing cars. But Maya's calm exterior hid a past most couldn't imagine. She had spent years serving in the shadows, her name classified, her mission spoken of in whispers. Maya wasn't just a soldier. She was one of the most dangerous operatives the Special Forces had ever trained, a woman whose skills could dismantle entire operations, whose precision and focus made her an unstoppable force. But to the people in this small, tight-knit community, Maya's story didn't matter. All they saw was the color of her skin. From the moment she moved in, she felt the cold stares and heard the muttered insults. There were suspicious notes left on her doorstep, anonymous phone calls late at night, and vandalism to her car. Still, Maya stayed silent. She had faced enemies far more dangerous than a few small-minded neighbors. She told herself she could handle it. But everything changed on the night they decided to take things further. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore, it was about destruction. A group of them, emboldened by hate and a false sense of power, decided Maya didn't belong. They broke windows, smashed doors, and set fire to the place she called home, all while laughing and recording their acts as if it were some kind of twisted badge of honor. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was who Maya truly was. They didn't know about the missions that had taken her to some of the most dangerous corners of the world. They didn't know she had spent years training to outsmart and overpower men who thought they were untouchable. They didn't know that, while her house burned, Maya was watching. From the shadows, she studied their faces, memorizing every detail, the way they moved, the way they spoke, the tattoos on their arms, and the cars they drove. She wasn't just a victim of their hatred. She was a hunter, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But what would Maya do next? Would she let the authorities handle it, knowing justice could be slow and uncertain? Or would she take matters into her own hands, using the skills that had made her a legend in the world of special forces? One thing was clear. Maya wasn't going to let this go. The question wasn't if she would act, it was how. And as the last flames flickered out and the neighborhood went quiet again, Maya stood in the darkness, a storm of emotions brewing inside her. Anger, grief, resolve, they all fought for control. She had been pushed too far, and now, the people who thought they could destroy her were about to learn the hard way that they had messed with the wrong woman. What happened next would shock everyone, not just the perpetrators, but the entire community, the authorities, and even those who had silently watched from their windows. Because Maya wasn't just defending herself, she was sending a message. Maya sat in the darkness of her car, parked a few blocks away, her eyes fixed on the glow of the flames in the distance. The heat of the fire was long gone, but the smoldering wreckage of her home remained, a stark reminder of the night's events. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, her mind racing. Every instinct she'd honed over years of training told her to act now, to move quickly before the trail went cold. But Maya knew better. Patience had always been her most powerful weapon. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the events of the night replay in her mind. She saw their faces again, clearer this time. The ringleader, a tall man with a shaved head, had barked orders at the others. He was the one who'd kicked down her front door, his voice loud and full of arrogance. Then there was the younger one, barely out of his teens, nervously glancing over his shoulder as he spray-painted hateful words on her garage. And the woman. Yes, there had been a woman, standing off to the side, recording everything on her phone with a smirk on her face. Maya's heart ached as she thought of the life she had built in that house. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was her refuge, her escape from a world that often felt too cruel. The photographs on the walls, the books carefully arranged on the shelves, the little trinkets she'd picked up during her travels, they were all gone now, reduced to ash. But the fire hadn't destroyed her spirit. If anything, it had ignited something deep within her, a need to fight back, to reclaim her power. The truth was, Maya had always known she couldn't stay invisible forever. She had chosen this quiet neighborhood precisely because it seemed so ordinary, so far removed from the chaos of her previous life. After years of covert operations, she thought she could finally just be Maya, a woman who liked to read, garden, and walk her dog in the evenings. But her past had taught her to always be prepared, even in the most peaceful settings. She had studied her surroundings, memorized the layout of the streets, and taken note of the people who lived nearby. She remembered her first encounter with her neighbors. It was a chilly morning in early autumn when she moved in, the air crisp with a scent of fallen leaves. Maya had waved politely to the couple across the street as she unloaded boxes from her car, but they had only stared at her, their smiles forced and thin. Later, she overheard them whispering about her on their porch. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," the woman had said. "Yeah," the man replied. "What do you think someone like her does for a living?" Maya had ignored them, brushing it off as harmless ignorance. But as the weeks passed, the hostility became harder to dismiss. There were subtle things at first: a cold shoulder at the local grocery store, a refusal to hold the elevator door open, muffled laughter as she walked by. Then came the notes, scrawled in messy handwriting and left on her doorstep. "Go back to where you came from. You're not welcome here." Each one stung more than the last. But Maya had dealt with worse. She had survived situations that would break most people. The missions she had been a part of, the ones no one would ever hear about, had shaped her into someone who didn't crumble under pressure. Still, this was different. This wasn't a war zone or a covert mission. This was supposed to be her home. And now it was gone. Maya opened her eyes and glanced at the notebook sitting on the passenger seat. In it, she had already jotted down everything she could remember about the attackers, their descriptions, their voices, their movements. She had a plan forming, but it wasn't just about vengeance. Maya wasn't reckless. She understood the importance of precision. She needed to know more about them, who they were, where they lived, what motivated their hatred. The next day, as the sun rose and the neighborhood buzzed with gossip about the fire, Maya put her plan into motion. Dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, she blended in easily as she walked through the streets, her expression neutral, her eyes sharp. She noted the clusters of people gathered on corners, their voices hushed as they exchanged theories about what had happened. "I heard it was some kind of accident," one woman said, clutching a coffee cup. "No way," another replied. "I saw the graffiti before the fire started." This was intentional. Maya listened carefully, picking up bits and pieces of information. She didn't respond to their comments or try to correct their assumptions. Instead, she kept walking, her mind focused on the task at hand. She started with a local diner, a small, family-owned place where most of the neighborhood regulars went for breakfast. Maya slipped into a booth near the back, her ears tuned to the conversations around her. It didn't take long to pick up a lead. "Did you hear about what happened to that woman's house?" a man at the counter asked the waitress. "Yeah," she replied. "Terrible, isn't it? But honestly, I'm not surprised. She's been causing a lot of talk since she moved in." "What kind of talk?" the man pressed. The waitress hesitated, lowering her voice. "You know, people saying she doesn't fit in around here. I've even heard some folks say they don't want her kind in this neighborhood." Maya's jaw tightened as she listened, but she kept her expression calm. She waited for the man to leave before approaching the waitress, her tone friendly and casual. "Excuse me," Maya said. "I couldn't help overhearing. Do you know who's been saying those things?" The waitress glanced around nervously, then leaned in. "I shouldn't be saying this, but if you're looking for troublemakers, I'd keep an eye on that group that hangs out by the park. Especially that guy with the shaved head. He's always running his mouth about how this neighborhood should stay the way it used to be." Maya nodded, thanking her before slipping out of the diner. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She knew the park the waitress had mentioned, a small, rundown area with a few benches and a basketball court. It wasn't far from her old house, and she had seen groups of people loitering there before. Over the next few days, Maya carefully observed the park from a distance. She saw the ringleader almost immediately, his presence unmistakable. He was loud and brash, his body language exuding a sense of dominance over the others. Maya took note of his habits, when he arrived, who he spoke to, how long he stayed. She noticed the younger man as well, always lingering on the edges of the group, his posture uncertain. Maya's observations only confirmed what she already knew. These weren't random people acting on impulse. They were organized, deliberate in their actions. And they weren't going to stop unless someone made them. As the days passed, Maya began to piece together the puzzle, but there were still unanswered questions. Who were these people really? What had driven them to target her so viciously? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go? Maya didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. Maya waited for the perfect moment, knowing that timing was everything. Her training had taught her to strike only when she had the upper hand, and this situation was no different. Days of careful observation had given her all the information she needed. She had pieced together their routines, their hiding spots, even their fears. But Maya wasn't just planning to scare them or make them feel regret. This was about more than retaliation. It was about making them understand the consequences of their actions, in a way they'd never forget. On a cold, moonlit night, she moved into action. The group had gathered at the park again, laughing and drinking, their voices carrying through the quiet streets. Maya stayed in the shadows, silent and invisible, just as she had been trained to do. She watched as the ringleader, the man with the shaved head, barked orders at the others, his voice filled with the same arrogance she had seen on the night of the fire. Maya knew she couldn't rely on brute force alone. This wasn't about a physical confrontation. It was about outsmarting them, breaking down their confidence piece by piece. She had set the stage carefully, planting seeds of doubt and fear in their minds over the past few days. Unexplained noises outside their homes, strange notes left on their cars, anonymous phone calls that hung up as soon as they answered. They didn't know it was her, of course, but she could see the unease in their faces now. As the group huddled around their makeshift bonfire, Maya made her first move. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the park, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The group fell silent, their laughter replaced by confused glances. The ringleader stood up, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing to see. Probably just a car, he muttered, trying to dismiss it. But Maya saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hand hovered near his pocket. Then, one by one, the streetlights around the park began to flicker. The group exchanged nervous looks, their bravado quickly fading. The youngest member, the nervous teenager, shifted uncomfortably, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should leave," he said, his words trembling. "Shut up," the ringleader snapped. But even he couldn't hide the crack in his confidence. Maya waited until the tension was at its peak before stepping into the light. She moved slowly, deliberately, her silhouette appearing like a ghost from the darkness. The group froze, their eyes widening as they recognized her. "You thought you could destroy me," Maya said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "You thought I would just disappear?" The ringleader took a step forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "What are you going to do? Call the cops?" he sneered, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his tone. Maya tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing on her lips. "You think this is about the cops?" she asked. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Before he could respond, Maya pulled out her phone and pressed a button. The sound of their laughter, their voices, and even their hateful words from the night of the fire played loudly from a hidden speaker. It was a recording she had captured from her careful surveillance, a clear, undeniable piece of evidence tying them to the crime. The group panicked, their bravado crumbling as they realized the weight of what she had on them. The woman who had recorded the fire on her phone tried to step back, her face pale. "You can't prove anything," she stammered. "Oh, I think I can," Maya replied. But here's the thing. I'm not here for the police. I'm here for you. She stepped closer, her presence commanding. You destroyed my home, my sanctuary. You wanted to make me feel powerless. But you underestimated me. You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. Let me show you. With a series of swift, calculated moves, Maya dismantled their false sense of security. She wasn't violent, but her precision left no room for doubt. She disarmed the ringleader of his knife with a single motion, her movements so fluid it was as if time itself had slowed down. She spoke as she acted, her voice steady and unwavering. You've spent your lives bullying people, thinking your hatred makes you strong. But strength isn't in destruction. It's in control, in discipline, in knowing when to act. By the time she was done, the group was scattered, shaken, their confidence shattered. The ringleader, now sitting on the ground, his head in his hands, finally looked up at her. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice weak. Maya leaned in close, her eyes piercing. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to feel the fear you've caused in others. And I want you to know that if you ever hurt anyone else, I'll be watching. She walked away then, her footsteps fading into the night. The group didn't dare follow her, too stunned to move. The next morning, Maya filed a detailed report with the authorities, including all the evidence she had collected. The perpetrators were arrested, their actions exposed to the community. But Maya didn't stop there. She worked quietly with local organizations to rebuild not just her home, but the sense of safety and belonging for others who had been targeted by hate. And just when it seemed like the story had reached its end, there was one final twist. Weeks later, the ringleader received a letter in the mail. It contained no threats, no accusations, just a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. You were lucky this time. It was unsigned, but he knew exactly who it was from. And for the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight of his actions. Maya had reclaimed her power, not through vengeance, but through resilience. She had turned their hatred into a lesson, one they would carry with them forever. And as she stood on the porch of her newly rebuilt home, she looked out at the world with a quiet sense of peace. She had won, not just the battle, but the war for her own humanity. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly returned to its routine, but things weren't quite the same. The incident had cast a long shadow, forcing everyone to confront the kind of ugliness that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. For some, it was uncomfortable to reckon with. For others, it was a call to action. Maya knew she couldn't rebuild her home alone, but she was surprised by the people who showed up to help. It wasn't just friends from the organizations she'd worked with, it was neighbors, too. Some of the very people who had ignored her, dismissed her, or looked the other way when the harassment began were now rolling up their sleeves, hammering nails, carrying planks of wood, or simply offering a kind word. It wasn't about guilt or obligation, Maya realized. It was about growth. The fire that destroyed her house had also ignited a conversation in the community, one that was long overdue. People began asking themselves hard questions about the kind of neighborhood they wanted to live in and the kind of people they wanted to be. Mrs. Franklin, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, approached Maya one afternoon with a plate of freshly baked cookies. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed them over, and her eyes brimmed with emotion. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I saw what was happening to you, and I didn't do anything. I told myself it wasn't my business, but that was wrong. I'm so sorry. Maya looked at her for a long moment, then took the plate with a small smile. It's never too late to do the right thing, she said. Not everyone came around, of course. Some neighbors kept their distance, avoiding eye contact whenever Maya passed by. She didn't waste her energy worrying about them. Her focus was on the people who wanted to change, who wanted to make things better, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt unwelcome or unsafe. One of the most unexpected visitors was the young man from the group that had attacked her house. His name was Tyler, and he showed up on her doorstep one day with a nervous expression and a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers. I don't know what I'm doing here, he admitted, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was stupid, and I let myself get caught up in something I didn't even understand. You didn't deserve any of it. Maya studied him carefully. He was young, barely out of his teens, and there was a genuine remorse in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. She could see the weight of his guilt, the way it seemed to hang over him like a dark cloud. You can't undo what happened, she said finally, but you can choose to be better moving forward. It's up to you. Tyler nodded, his face pale but determined. I will. I promise. Maya didn't know if he would keep that promise, but she hoped he would. She had learned a long time ago that you couldn't force people to change. You could only show them the way and hope they chose the right path. As her house was rebuilt, Maya found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The fire, the hatred, the fear. It had all tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But it had also reminded her of who she was and what she stood for. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter, someone who refused to let hatred define her or dictate her life. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her new home, sipping a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Word's gotten out about what you've been doing, the message read. I'm proud of you, Maya. You're still the fiercest person I know. Maya smiled faintly as she set the phone down. She didn't need recognition or accolades, but it felt good to know that her actions had made an impact. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maya thought about the future. She knew there would always be challenges, always be people who tried to tear others down out of fear or ignorance. But she also knew there was strength in community, in standing together and refusing to give in to hate. Her neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was changing. The conversations that had started after the fire were continuing, growing louder and more inclusive. People were learning, listening, and taking responsibility. It wasn't a fast process, and it wasn't an easy one, but it was real. For Maya, that was enough. She had faced the worst and come out stronger, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small or powerless. She had shown her neighbors and the world that strength wasn't about violence or domination. It was about resilience, courage, and the ability to rise above. As she sat there, watching the first stars appear in the sky, Maya felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Her journey wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had rebuilt her home, her community, and in some ways herself. And as far as she was concerned, that was the most important victory of all. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of children laughing in the distance. Life went on, as it always did, but Maya knew she had left her mark. The world was a little better, a little kinder, because she had chosen to stand up and fight for what was right. And that, she thought, was a legacy worth leaving behind.